When you think about the epic stories of the Bible, your mind probably goes to kings in giant palaces, or maybe prophets walking through busy cities. But what if I told you that the single most important home in all of these ancient stories wasn't made of stone or wood at all? Okay, let's get into it.
So let me just ask you straight up. When we're talking about all the homes in the Bible, from Abraham's long journey to the Israelites wandering in the desert, what do you think was the one home, the one structure that was at the absolute heart of it all?
The answer is so simple, but it is incredibly deep. It wasn't a palace. It wasn't some grand estate. It was a tent. And seriously, understanding this simple, portable shelter, it just unlocks a whole new way of seeing these stories.
To really get why the tent is so important, we have to go way back. Because tent dwelling, well, it isn't just a small detail in the Bible. It's this ancient tradition that shows up right from the beginning and sticks around for centuries. It literally shaped the culture.
Just look at how consistently tents pop up all through the biblical story. It starts way back in Genesis 4, where this guy Jabal is called the father of the whole tent-dwelling lifestyle. Then after the flood, the big blessing from Noah involves dwelling in tents. And of course, you've got the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who lived their entire lives in tents. This tradition just keeps going, right through the 40 years in the desert and, believe it or not, even into the time of kings like David. It was the original home.
And this lifestyle wasn't just for shepherds out in the middle of nowhere. No, it was totally woven into the fabric of society. During the huge religious feast in Jerusalem, thousands upon thousands of people would travel to the city. So where did they all stay? You guessed it, in tents, all over the hills surrounding the capital. It was practical, sure, but it was also a powerful link back to their roots.
So let's zoom out a little bit. We're not just talking about a single tent here and there. We're talking about entire communities. And these weren't just random clusters of shelters. They were organized, super functional, mobile towns that had a very clear social structure.
The design itself was brilliant. The tents were always arranged in a big circle, and there was a really important reason for that. At night, all the community's livestock, their sheep, their goats, could be brought into the middle, totally protected from predators or thieves. And you always knew who was in charge. The chief's tent was bigger than everyone else's, and right outside he'd have this big spear stuck in the ground. That was the symbol of his authority, no question.
And to give you a sense of the sheer scale we're talking about, just think about Abraham's camp for a second. The Bible says he had 318 trained soldiers who were born in his own household. This was not a small family camping trip. This was a massive, mobile town with hundreds, maybe even thousands of people.
All right, so what were these things actually made of? This is where we get into some truly ingenious ancient tech. The design was simple, but it was incredibly resourceful and just perfectly adapted to the harsh environment.
The Bedouin tent is called a beit sha'ar, which literally means house of hair. And yeah, that's exactly what it was. It was woven from the coarse black hair of goats. This material was amazing. In the summer, you could roll up the sides and get some much-needed shade. And in the winter, it was fantastic protection against those cold, biting winds. And this is the part that just blows my mind. When the goat hair fabric is totally dry, the weave is actually a bit loose. It's porous, which lets air flow through. But the second it starts to rain, something incredible happens. Those natural fibers soak up the moisture and they swell, tightening the weave until it becomes completely 100% waterproof. It's like a natural self-sealing roof. How cool is that?
That distinct black color of the goat hair tents made them such an iconic part of the landscape. They were so well known that they even show up in the poetry of the Bible. In the Song of Solomon, you get this really powerful line comparing a person's dark beauty to the striking look of the tents of Kedar. Okay, now this is a really key detail that often gets totally lost in translation. When you read the word sackcloth in the Bible, or cilicio, it's talking about this exact same coarse, spiny goat hair fabric that they used for tents. It's not the softer stuff we might imagine. So this same material was used for their homes and also as a sign of deep mourning. It connects the everyday with the profoundly spiritual.
So the structure was pretty simple. You have this big cloth canopy, it's held up by some wooden poles, and then stretched tight with ropes tied to stakes that are hammered into the ground. And get this, even a simple tent stake becomes the hero of a crazy biblical story. In the book of Judges, it's a tent stake that Jael uses to defeat the enemy general Sisera. An everyday household object becomes a legendary weapon.
Okay, so we know how the tent was built. Now let's step inside. What was life actually like in a house of hair?
Well, the number one rule was portability. Everything you owned had to be essential, it had to be multifunctional, and it had to be ready to pack up and go at a moment's notice.
The main thing to remember is there was just no clutter. Furnishings were totally minimal and practical. You'd have some rugs on the ground. For a bed, you're looking at simple mats, and you'd just use your cloak as a blanket. You'd have your sacks of grain, leather skins filled with water, a small hand mill for grinding flour, a few pots. That's your kitchen. For light, a simple little oil lamp. And for chairs, if you were lucky enough to own a camel, you'd bring its furniture, the saddle and gear, inside and sit on that.
And that little detail about the camel furniture, it perfectly shows how these everyday items are woven right into the Bible stories. Remember when Rachel steals her father's idols and has to hide them? Where does she put them? Under the camel's furniture that she's sitting on. It seems like a weird detail to us, but it was just a clever use of a common household item.
So what happened when a family grew? While they didn't go out and build a whole new tent, they just added on. They would weave a new section of goat hair cloth and just extend the whole structure. And this very practical act became this powerful metaphor that the prophet Isaiah used to describe the future growth and prosperity of the entire nation. But in the end, the tent was so much more than just a roof over their heads. It really stood for this deep spiritual idea, a whole worldview really that shaped who these people were and how they saw their relationship with God.
The writer of Hebrews just absolutely nails this idea. The patriarchs, they knew that their life in tents was a physical picture of a much deeper spiritual truth, that they were just temporary residents here. They were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. Their real home, their permanent home, wasn't something they could build. It was a future promise from God. The tent was a daily reminder of that.
And here's where we really need to shift our perspective. Living in a tent wasn't seen as a sign of being poor or anything like that, just the opposite. It was a source of real pride, of dignity. Because their greatest ancestors, people like Abraham, lived this way. Future generations actually celebrated the simple, mobile life of a tent dweller in their most sacred writings. It was a link to a noble past and a core part of their identity.
So that leaves us with a final thought to chew on. When we realize that the central home of the Bible isn't some grand castle, but a simple, black, goat hair tent, a symbol of community, of ingenuity, and of a pilgrim's faith, how does that change the way we read these ancient stories today?